What is going on, everybody? Jay here, and we're going to take a look together at the brand new Core 500 Mini ITX chassis from Fractal Design. The Node 304 was one of my favorite ITX chassis of all time, but it had some things I didn't like about it. The Core 500 very well may have solved that, so don't go anywhere. The new Z170 classified motherboard from EVGA features 8-phase PWM, 4-way SLI support, along with top-notch components to offer gamers and enthusiasts more of what they want. A badass motherboard with no compromises. Click the link below to learn more. Now, I'll be honest when I say I'm surprised that they launched this chassis under the Core pseudonym name brand. This really feels like it could have been in the Node series, and let me tell you why. It's very familiar to the Node 304. It's very, very similar. A lot of characteristics of this case share Node 304 features. For instance, it's got a single shell that you undo 4 screws, the whole shell comes off, and you have access to 3 sides of the case. Very similar to the Node 304. The power supply orientation and the way the power supply plug incorporates with the rear, again, just like the Node 304. The layout of the ITX motherboard, the placement of the fan in the rear, all identical to the Node 304. However, they have made some serious changes to this that to me make it feel like an upgrade to the Node 304, so I'm a little surprised that they put it under the Core name. This could be an attempt by Fractal to really boost their Core presence when it comes to the Core line of cases that they make, and maybe it was also a move to kind of keep the pricing down just a little bit. Now, starting with an external tour of the case, the front here is a faux finish where it's plastic, but it's made to look like a sort of a brushed aluminum design. And you have some vents here on the side, which really are for show because there are no fans in the front of this case. In fact, there's not even any direct airflow from these vents to the inside of the chassis. So they're really just more of an aesthetic breakup to give some detail to the front of the case. But you can also see one of the major differences between I keep calling it the Core Node code. But as you can see, it does include a 5 1/4 expansion bay on here, which is good for people who wanted an optical drive or a fan controller or whatever else you might put in that slot. I mean, there's lots of things accessory-wise that you can stick in there. On the top here, you have, this is one of the major changes from the Node 304 where you had a power button on the side and then your input jacks on the side. That was pretty much it. Where they moved it to the top here, you've got a power reset, you've got a hard drive indicator light, headphone jack, mic jack, and 2 USB 3.0. Now, by tilting it forward like this, you can see another major design improvement over the Node 304 is you have a top vent, which will actually incorporate with 2 140mm fans or 120mm fans, giving you much better airflow in this thing than you were getting with the Node 304. The Node 304 had 2 90mm fans on the front for intake and 1 120 or 140mm exhaust fan on the back, which is creating, in my opinion, kind of havoc for airflow, especially when you had a lot of stuff obstructing the 90mm fans, especially with the hanging hard drives. On the left side of the case here, you have a big giant vent because this is going to allow better airflow for your graphics cards. Now, I would still recommend a blower style card in this chassis here. That way the graphics card is not relying on any of the chassis airflow to keep the graphics card cool. It can pull in its own fresh air from the side and exhaust it out the rear, giving it a much lesser impact to the cooling environment of the chassis where the GPU acts a little bit more independently. If you were to put in some sort of a atmospheric design where the hot air is exhausted into the atmosphere and then the chassis has to exhaust the hot air, you're going to find that you're going to heat up other components in here, namely your CPU. On the back of the chassis, you can see you have your exhaust fan and then you have your GPU mounting brackets right there, and then you've got the power plug for the PSU, which is an extension cable that plugs into the front mounted power supply on this, again just like the Node 304. And then lastly, on the left side, you've got your vent right here for the exhausting of the power supply unit. Now, moving on to the bottom of the chassis, you can see you do have a filtered intake here for your power supply, so it's going to pull the air in the bottom and exhaust it out the side, once again allowing the power supply unit to not really affect the atmospheric condition of the chassis. So there's a lot of thought in this chassis where you're going to keep things from interfering with each other, especially when small form factor cases like this, cooling is everything. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at the inside of the chassis. And to do that, you guys are gonna have to scoot in and get a little bit closer. I promise I don't smell too badly. I took a shower before doing this video. Not really, but I just wanted to make you feel a little better. So like I mentioned from the start, all of the sides and the top are covered by this single shell of a cover here, which fits very, very snug. It's not exactly the easiest to get on and off, but hey, it gets the job done. Now right away you can see on the top of the chassis here we have a bracket for two 120mm or two 140mm fans. Now obviously this could also accommodate all-in-one water cooling, which is a major improvement over the Node 304. Now the way you accomplish that is you pop off the front panel, which will give you access to some screws so that you can actually remove the if I can get this stupid thing off. I've already done it like 5 times. It should be easier than this. So by removing these screws right here, you can remove the 5 1/4 bay, which is attached to the radiator slash fan bracket, and then you can install an all-in-one water cooling loop in there or extra fans or whatever. The only thing you need to keep in mind though is to use the 140s up front right here, you are gonna have to, well, pretty much give up the expansion bay because they're gonna interfere with these little tabs that are kind of sticking out right here, which are kind of a, let's see if you guys can see that, right here, which are kind of a guide track for an optical drive or whatever may go in the front right here. Now as you can see, you do have a pretty good amount of depth right here, and they've lined up the 5 1/4 and the bracket on the top here in such a manner that if you are using something like an H100 or a 120mm size fans for your all-in-one cooler, like an H100i or a 220X or something like that, you could pretty much use this with the 5 1/4 bay not having to be removed. But if you want to go with something thicker like the Predator, and I think I mentioned the 220X a second ago, which is also pretty thick, those types of all-in-one coolers, you would want to remove the bracket and then install that. Now all of the cables on the inside here are black, which is very, very nice, all the way to the end. You've got ribbon cable here for all the front panel connectors. So unlike the Node 304, you're not going to see any rainbowed colors on the end of that. Here's all your front panel connectors here. Again, black all the way to the end. And then of course you do have your fan. Now the standoffs are pretty much pre-mounted here where they are a part of the floorboard of the chassis. So you don't have to worry about trying to screw any of that in. But because, as you can see here, there is no cutout to the bottom of the motherboard tray area, if you're going to install an all-in-one cooler or an aftermarket heatsink of some sort, you're going to have to pre-install that on your motherboard. Otherwise, you are not going to be able to access that. It would have been nice if Fractal Design had put some sort of a removable plate on here where maybe you could unscrew a couple of screws, take the plate out, have access to the back of the motherboard tray, and stick that back on. I don't think it would have cost them a lot of money to do that. That would be something that'd be nice to see. It lacked any sort of access to the bottom of the motherboard in the Node 304. I kind of hope they would have taken this opportunity to address that. However, once again, they have not. Now on this side of the case, you can see you have room for 2 3.5-inch drives or 2 2.5-inch drives. Now, if you include these two here, a 3.5-inch drive access right there, as well as a front-mounted SSD mount on the front, you could technically have 4 hard drives in this thing. I mean, that's having 4 hard drives in this, 3 of them being 3.5-inch compatible. That's a lot of hard drive space in such a small chassis. Now, because I know a lot of people are going to ask, and I pretty much need to know for myself, especially if I'm going to use this chassis for, say, my PDX build, we need to see whether or not the all-in-one cooler is going to fit in here.
Transition.
Okay, so as you guys saw, I decided to try and put the Predator 240 in here, and it's not gonna fit. The tubing is too long. Now, one of the cool things about the Predator is I could put different fittings on there and shorten the tubing up or whatever I wanted to do, and I might still try that. But at least the way it fits out of the box into this case, natively it doesn't fit. Hey guys, me again, Editing Jay. I'm not really correcting Recording Jay on anything this time. That's kind of nice, right? It's sort of a change of pace, but I want to mention something that I thought I mentioned in the video that apparently I didn't. And that is the fact that I can't turn the radiator around the other way. I'm sure people are like, well, why don't you just turn the radiator around so the fittings are towards the front, you'll get some more slack and then everything is fixed. Well, remember, the power supply goes up front. And the fittings hang down too low, there's just simply not enough room. I tried, but it didn't fit. And I'm still sad about that. All right, Recording Jay, go ahead and take it away. Now I'm starting to think that maybe all-in-one water cooling wasn't really the focus with this because there's just not enough room between the top of the bracket here and the socket. And that holds true because I tried it also with the Corsair H100i. And even though this is a much tinier cooler compared to the Predator, I still couldn't get it to fit because, again, very rigid tubing, and it just put like crazy kinks and bends on the tubing here to where I just couldn't get it in there comfortably. It was putting way too much force on the socket because the tubing was wanting to straighten out, which was pulling up on, I just wasn't comfortable with that whatsoever. But that's not to say that this case, that's really a flaw, because I mean, let's be honest here, ITX cases that are big enough to accommodate water cooling typically are too big to make sense as ITX cases. So an ITX case like this really did show the improvement where it's intended to be, which is better airflow. And that is the fact that you can put intakes on the top, exhaust on the rear, and you can really keep your components cool, which the Node 304 did an okay job at, but wasn't fantastic. Now, you could still do an all-in-one cooler on the back. You could do a 120 on the back. You're just not getting a 240 on the top. You can get a 120 or possibly, no, you're not getting a 140 on the back. There's just not enough room between the top here. I mean, you could remove the top bracket, but then you basically turn it into a Node 304. So you could do a 120 all-in-one water cooling unit in the back and then maybe have an intake fan up front. You probably would not get a 120 on the rear and a fan right here in the front. It's probably not going to fit. I don't have any 120 all-in-one water coolers hanging around. Otherwise, I would give that a shot. But again, I don't have one. But anyway, I think the Core 500 is a pretty good step up from the Node 304 in my opinion, simply because of this, the 5 1/4 bay, the relocation of the buttons, and the airflow, honestly, is what's most important. All right, so tell me what you guys think. And if you have any ITX chassis you think I should try out that maybe fit that kind of a niche group of needing an all-in-one water cooling unit compatible and still being small form factor without being, you know, too big like the Case Labs X2M, yeah, fits water cooling, but then again, it technically could fit an ATX case in there if we just rearrange some things. So it's way too big for an ITX travel case like I'm looking for, but it's good for like a small desktop ITX build that could still fit water cooling. So that's why I'm not using the X2M. Anyway, guys, I'm gonna get out of here. Thanks for watching today's video. I think Fractal Design did a fantastic job on this case. I'll find a use for it. I definitely will. Just don't know exactly what it's going to be yet. I'm disappointed because I wanted to do a water cooling build in this and take it to PDX land. I don't really want to cannibalize my Predator and take it apart. I mean, that's an option, but I don't really want to do that. I don't know. We'll figure it out. All right, guys, thanks for watching. And as always, we will see you in the next video.